Hi everyone, it's Lindsay with High Altitude Astrology, and I'm here with another chart reading. Today I'm going to be looking at the chart of Zach Braff. And if you want to follow along, his birth information is April 6th, 1975 in Red Bank, New Jersey, and there is a birth time of 12:06 p.m. If you don't know who Zach Braff is, he was on a television show called Scrubs for a length of time. It was a successful comedy on TV. And then afterward, he created a movie called Garden State in 2004, which he actually wrote and directed. And now he is on the scene again with a new television show. It's called Alex Inc., and it just came out in late March. And he kind of came into my consciousness again at that time, and I wanted to understand his chart a little better and see what was going on currently with transits and all of the rest. So let's take a look at his natal chart first. He is an Aries sun at 16 degrees, and his sun sits in his 10th house of career. So right away that tells us that he's somebody whose light or whose energy is going to radiate in that area of life. And he has certainly had a big career or a strong career, and obviously it continues with this new television program that he's starting. Also, what's interesting about his chart is that he's got Mercury at 3 degrees of Aries conjunct his midheaven at 1 degree of Aries. And actually, Mercury sits next to Jupiter at 4 degrees. So to have Mercury conjunct Jupiter right on your midheaven, it means that that energy is going to come across in the work that you do. So to have Mercury and Jupiter conjunct in the sign of Aries means that you're going to communicate with a lot of passion, with a lot of authority, with a lot of strength and courage, but your communication also is going to have some kind of element of expanding not only your own consciousness, but the consciousness of those around you. So Mercury takes on this kind of philosopher's quality or a teacher quality to it. And again, in the sign of Aries, it's like this really inspiring energy. He'll have a lot to say, and he'll have a lot of enthusiasm behind what he says. And there will be some kind of message in what he says. And again, this is all on the cusp of his 10th house of career. So whatever, of course you could say this about any artist or, creative person. They're always like trying to share some sort of message. But in his chart, what it's showing is that he definitely has a very strong connection in his work to bringing messages across to people. Now, what's also interesting is that Mercury-Jupiter conjunction in Aries opposes his Pluto at 7 degrees of Libra in his 4th house. And you can hear it sometimes in the way that he talks if you listen to interviews, certain interviews, where he can speak more freely. But he kind of has a little bit of a bite to his words. Like I would say it's almost more like he'll use foul language sometimes, and he's not afraid to kind of take his comedy in a direction where it gets a little dirty or whatever. It seems like he's sort of comfortable in that realm a bit. And actually, speaking of comedy, which that's the genre that he mainly acts in, and his Mercury-Jupiter is about the comic, because it wants to bring humor to the world. Jupiter, that's where Jupiter's name comes from, jovial. And jovial is about laughing and being funny. And so that's definitely there in his chart too, that he has that kind of part of him specifically in his communication. And finally, with that Mercury Jupiter opposite Pluto, that could also mean that the things that he talks about, the things that he shares about, the things that he ends up teaching about through his work also have some sort of regenerative quality to them. So there's humor involved, but there's also, dealing with the deeper aspects of life, transformation, death, regeneration. So that too is a part of how he comes across through his communicative style, his teaching style, all related to his work and career. He has an Aquarius moon at 21 degrees, and it conjuncts Mars at 26 degrees in his 8th house. Again, kind of another symbol of somebody who wants to look more deeply into things. And I know that the moon being the symbol of the mother, his mother took on, I believe, a second career as a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and so having that moon there would indicate that, in that 8th house, would indicate that the female principal in his life is somebody who stimulated looking more deeply into himself. He has, again, Mars there as well. So to have moon conjunct Mars, that's almost like having an Aries moon. Even though he's got an Aquarius moon, Mars rules Aries. So there's a lot of energy behind his feelings and his expression of emotion. To have Mars there, it's like he feels very strongly in the way that he feels, and there's a lot of energy to express his emotions and feelings, which actually might help him to access emotion through his work, to have that moon Mars in that 8th house. And to have an Aquarius moon, that brings somebody who is a little bit more perhaps detached from the emotions and feelings, even though with the Mars there, it can mean, there's a lot of energy behind the emotions and feelings. To have the Aquarius moon does give him the ability to kind of step back and detach and not be as passionate or as connected to what he feels being the right way or the only way. Aquarius moons, they're interesting. Air, it's an air energy, but it's fixed. But it's very much about, freedom and wanting to have the freedom to express ourselves however way we feel and whatever way that we want. So this could really mean too, because the moon is the principle of the feminine energy again, that he looks for women that have a bit of a feeling or energy of freedom around them. He may not want somebody who's so attached and so needy that it's kind of a turnoff. Moon in Aquarius really wants the freedom to kind of do whatever it is they want to do. Not that it means like, having affairs or whatever, but it can just mean that there needs to be a lot of freedom in the home and in the relationship, so that that Aquarius moon doesn't feel like they're being, too confined or like held back in relationship. Speaking of relationship, his Venus is at 21 degrees of Taurus, and it squares that Aquarius moon exactly. So this is interesting because Venus in Taurus is the person that wants relationship. Venus rules the sign of Taurus. It's very comfortable in the sign of Taurus. Venus is our pleasure-seeking principle. It's our relationship energy. It's our feelings around material wealth in our life. And Taurus is about comfort and security. It really wants to find security through the work, and it appreciates the sensual things in life, the tangible things in life. So that Venus in Taurus actually squares that moon in Aquarius. So there's almost like two different kind of energies going on here. Well, one really does enjoy experiencing pleasures in life and relationship, but the other one, the moon in Aquarius, needs to feel free, and it needs to feel like it's got space and room and freedom. So it's interesting to have those two planets squared one another in the chart exactly to the T. A couple more things about his natal chart. I want to go back to his sun at 16 degrees of Aries. It actually does two things in his chart. It conjuncts Chiron at 23 degrees of Aries, and it trines Neptune at 11 degrees Sag. Let's start with the Sun-Neptune trine. I've heard him talk about his early life and how when he was young he went to camp when perhaps all of his other friends were pursuing sports, and that for him that was just what he really appreciated. It was actually, I believe, acting camp and theater camp, and he felt kind of different, but fortunately that aspect of him was nurtured, and I see that part of him with the Sun trine Neptune being that creative self that he was able to have nurtured when he was a younger person. He talks about how he had a musical, I think it was a birthday celebration or a graduation perhaps, but it was musical themed, Broadway musicals. And to him, that was really exciting or really cool. And again, Sun trine Neptune, because Neptune is the imagination. Neptune is tapping into those finer, subtle, creative expressions. And Neptune is found in the chart of a lot of artists connected to the sun or connected to the Venus or connected to the moon, because it takes that ability to really tune into those Neptunian vibrations that help us express our creative self. Also, that sun conjuncts the Chiron at 23 degrees of Aries. And Chiron in Aries is a generational energy, but to have it very close to the sun means that it's operating a little more personally in one's life, especially because the sun is our light. It's how we shine out into the world. And to have Chiron next to it is an interesting combination, because Chiron is about a wound, and then somehow over time, learning about that wound and healing from that wound, and then being able to be like a teacher or a mentor to others who are suffering from the same issues. So to have Chiron in Aries, that means there's a wound actually around the self-expression, which is interesting because he's got his sun in Aries. So you would think, wow, he's somebody who's really self-confident and strong. But to have your Chiron in Aries, it means there is some kind of wound around the self-expression. And so there's something there in his self-expression with the Chiron next to it, that he's had to deal with some feelings around not feeling confident in self-expression or worthy through his self-expression. And again, this is all in his 10th house. So it's interesting that, maybe we haven't fully seen or known that part of him that has struggled, but you can kind of hear in some of those things that I described earlier, where he sort of says he sort of felt like the oddball, or, somebody who wasn't the same as everybody else, and had to kind of come to terms with that in his life. Oh, by the way, just so you know, he's got a Cancer rising at 20 degrees. And it's interesting because that makes him a person who's sensitive emotionally, but also able to feel a lot and to intuit a lot, and perhaps that also has helped him in his career through his creative self-expression. Cancer risings can be a bit shy too, and that might have been something that he's had to learn kind of to overcome as he's grown. So now let's look at his transits. So one of the aspects by transit that's happening in his chart right now is that transiting Pluto through Capricorn is conjuncting his 7th house of relationships. And this started in April of 2017, and it will end in November of 2019. I wanted to read something from celestialspace.wordpress.com describing Pluto's transit through the natal house, or the natal 7th house. Now, of course, this is a longer transit because Pluto moves so slowly, but when it's just moving over that cusp is when we might begin to feel, some of the shifts. It's like something tapping us on the shoulder and going, hey, this issue is coming up for you. So this person writes, the natal 7th house represents the we consciousness. We learn about ourselves through the other and relating to others, as well as all of life. Relationships are designed to help us heal and return to a state of wholeness and empowerment. The 7th house is about one-to-one relationships, as well as marriage, partnerships of all kinds, including business, as well as open enemies. Now enters the planet that represents deep transformation and transmutation, Pluto. One word describes the initial greeting of Pluto: intense. It's an interesting time because Pluto moves so slowly. Some of us never experience it moving across our 7th house cusp. And so this will just be a time where, he's really going to have to look at himself more deeply and how he is in relationship and the kinds of people he wants to be in relationship with, and be able to, discern through any kind of power struggles, or Pluto gives us that ability to really not only transform our own fears that are in our unconscious, but it allows us also to see with a better, clearer perspective, the relationship dynamics in our own lives. He's also having another interesting transit. It's called Uranus opposite Uranus, and this has started this month of May, and it ends next April 2019. And what's interesting about the Uranus opposite Uranus aspect is that it is an aspect of what we call the midlife transits in astrology. There's a few of them. Uranus is one, opposite Uranus is one. And really this is about waking up and changing that which is no longer serving us in our life. So this is Uranus moving through his 10th house of career, opposing his Uranus in his 4th house, the deepest part of who he is, his home, his family, where he comes from. So, it'll be interesting to see how this manifests in his life. I mean, he's had this opportunity at this time to do this new program, this new show on television. And with Uranus, it's kind of like you never know how it's going to turn out. It's always exciting. It's always change. It's always something different. So perhaps it'll just be an exciting time that will, stimulate his career. There could be more change to come in his career. It's really hard to say exactly how it'll manifest, but the most important thing I would say, because it's Uranus and Aries opposite his Uranus, that it has to do with him really making sure that he responds to this Uranian insight that he might be getting at this time, especially about the direction that he wants to go for himself, because it's Uranus and Aries. Aries is about the self, and it's about self-assertion. So making sure that he's following a path that's really true for himself, and or making the steps and making the changes that are necessary in order to really feel like he's expressing his true self at this time. And finally, he has transiting Saturn squaring his Pluto, and this started in March of this year, and it's going to end in December. And Saturn's moving through the sign of Capricorn, through his 6th house, which is also a house of work, and it's squaring his Pluto, like I said, in the 4th house. And this is really a time of working hard, because Saturn requires discipline, Saturn requires effort, and then Pluto requires again, change and transformation. So with Saturn squaring the Pluto at this time, it means that he is going to have to work hard, especially in the area of work, that 6th house. But ultimately, it's going to require some perhaps transformation deep within him, letting go of old ways, because that's what Pluto asks of us. It asks us to regenerate the unconscious. And if there's anything there that's kind of driving us unconsciously, it's a time to really look at that and let go. And Pluto isn't necessarily always like something dark and negative that's in our unconscious. It could also be something really positive. And so I would say at this time, with Saturn squaring the Pluto, that it's going to require a lot of hard work, but also it's going to require a lot of like self-regeneration. And with the square, it kind of asks that we learn to integrate both of those principles. I wanted to read something from the Astrology King around the transit of Saturn squaring Pluto. And he says that it means you have to work extra hard under challenging conditions just to get by. Powerful forces outside your control will create roadblocks in certain directions, so you stay on the right path and don't get ahead of yourself. You may have to ration your resources, cut bad habits, and make structural changes in your life. You will have to stop trying to control certain areas of your life, but take more control over others. When your goals and ambitions are tested by other people and by fate, you have to make hard decisions with serious consequences. These are big issues that will affect your life directions. It could be an important relationship, a career choice, your home, your health. You must decide whether to hold on and fight or to let go. Whatever happens, it must involve change. If your ambition involves change to improve your life, then you should fight for it. With patience, determination, and persistence, you can keep the dream alive. It will also help if you are flexible and ready to alter your plans according to changing circumstances. After this period of reorganization, your goals will be more attainable with less effort. So it's interesting that he's starting a new project right now, and I feel like this year will really be a indication or a test to see how this continues for him, how this new path goes, because it's saying, yes, there's a lot of energy that needs to be put into a new path, but if the new path isn't working, then you might need to cut your losses. So this will be an interesting year for him to see how everything continues to progress. So this has been my reading of Zach Braff's chart. If you like my channel, please subscribe. And I also offer readings. You can reach me at info@highaltitudeastrology.com. I also have a website. It is highaltitudeastrology.com. Thanks so much. Adios.